Thanks, Lisa. So I'm really excited to share about some of the work that I've been doing as part of the Region 12 Comprehensive Center with the Colorado Department of Education. So I'm going to build a little bit on what we talked about in our last session to present another lens through which you can think about how to focus your work around addressing shortages and the diversity of the educator workforce, and give you a demo and a tour of our GIS map and how it works. So last time we really made this connection about addressing both shortages and teacher diversity. We know from research that teachers are the most important within school factor driving student achievement. And then for diverse teachers also improve outcomes for all students. Outcomes such as graduation rates, student academic achievement, college enrollment. And this is particularly true for students of color. So if we address both shortages and diversity, we can ensure that all students, but particularly students of color, have access to effective instruction. And so that is why we think it's critically important to really explore both of these challenges together. And in our second webinar, one approach and lens to explore where you might want to prioritize addressing shortages and diversity is looking at the workforce pipeline. So where along the continuum of attract, prepare, develop, support, and retain do you need to focus? Where are you starting to see the gaps? And in that last webinar, we highlighted the Educator Talent Development Data Tool 2.0, which really showed where along on the continuum are you starting to see these gaps widen. We gave the example of maybe there is a district that's hiring and they think there's some implicit bias in their hiring. But then they take a look at the candidate applicants is proportional in diversity as the teachers that they hired. So it suggests some inherited gaps. So really looking earlier in the continuum. So that's one lens to kind of focus where you might prioritize what particular evidence-based strategies to address educator shortages and the diversity of the workforce. But we're going to present today kind of an additional lens to look at it and to explore in the context of place. We know, particularly for shortages, that it's often a school and subject level problem. So you might be a state and you look at your data and see that, hey, we have one chemistry teacher for every 400 students. But when you disaggregate that data and look more closely, it might show that, hey, in reality, we have one chemistry teacher for every 100 students in our affluent schools. But in our high need schools that are often underserved, we have one chemistry teacher for every 2,000 students. And these are the schools that are underserved and often our students of color attend. And so this really illustrates that how we address the problem, even if we're looking at the continuum, might look different depending on the community or the specific district or school. And so it's important to understand, in addition to where in the continuum, the context of place effects. So before we kind of explore place effects and what it means in a GIS application, I'm curious to hear from you all as you reflect on your own states or districts. What type of communities typically experience educator shortages or maybe a lack of diversity? So this could be your rural schools or maybe your low performing schools. And if you could also share in the chat, which subject areas in your state or district typically have the greatest educator shortages. So if you could answer, one or both of these questions in the chat box, we'd love to hear a little bit as you think about place in your own communities that typically experience some of these shortages or lack of diversity. All right, so I see schools that serve Native American or Indigenous students, or maybe low socioeconomic schools. Some subjects are things like the sciences or math, so those STEM fields, as well as special education. Seen a couple of rural schools, so that seems to be a trend, or just under-resourced schools or schools that serve our Black and Brown students. Great. So yeah, a lot of trends as far as rural. Thinking about the types of students those schools serve, typically are students of color or students that are often underserved. And then we think about subject areas, it's a lot of the STEM or maybe special education or even certain roles like counselors that may be difficult to find enough of. Great. So thank you for sharing it. Hopefully you start thinking these patterns of those same places where maybe you struggle with shortages or the lack of diversity when we kind of look at the maps and see the impact place can have. So one reason we think GIS can be a helpful tool is because of this thing called place effects. So where a student lives and learns and works can have dramatic impact on the outcome of their life. These place effects are often a result of unequal access to resources or opportunities. You can picture in your own community or your own town, there might be a part of that town, maybe it's divided by a border or some other road or something else. And as you picture the people who live on that other side of the border, on the other side of road, maybe they have less access to healthcare resources, maybe grocery stores, maybe it's a food desert. The homes might be valued less. And the schools in those communities typically have less resources. So you could imagine the students that are in those schools are experiencing or facing additional challenges that might be outside of the school walls that is still impacting their learning. And so these place effects can also apply in the context of addressing educator shortages and diversifying the workforce. Educators, like most people, want to work in a positive environment. Maybe they want to work close to where they live. They want to have a good salary, work for a supportive school leader. And so there are systems in place that may be impacting why there is shortages or the lack of diversity. So for example, there might be a school and there just isn't any educator preparation programs nearby. Or the graduates from those prep programs are not as diverse as the students in that community. Or maybe there's just more competitive job opportunities nearby. And so a GIS application will allow us to see and unpack these place effects and how these systems can interact. So I want to give you kind of a GIS 101 explanation of what it is and how it works. So GIS is basically a software application that uses maps and layers multiple data sets on top of each other. I will say COVID has made these maps very popular. You may have seen them for hotspots to understand what's been going on, but it can also be that same technology. It can be used for other issues and topics. And let me show you kind of a basic example of how it works. So here is kind of a simplified map of Colorado. The little dots in the center symbolize different schools. And the green dots signify our high performing schools and the red dots are lowest performing schools. The boxes on the right signify different data sets that we can layer onto this. So some K-12 data, some higher education data, maybe labor market data, and some other social or economic data. And then when we layer that data on top of each other, we can start to see that, oh, there are some interconnections between different systems that are typically impacting our lowest performing schools. And so GIS is a useful tool to bring together cross-sector entities and partners and policymakers to really see what are the challenges as well as opportunities as we try to unpack these different systems challenges. And addressing the educator workforce and diversifying it is a systems problem. There are many players that impact how to address these challenges along that continuum. It's educator prep programs to the SCAs, to districts, to schools. So everyone has a different role. And so this can be a tool to bring together those different stakeholders to see where are their challenges, where can we partner and collaborate together so that we can convene those right people to take the right actions at the right place. So that's kind of the GIS 101 to sort of explain how it works. And so now I'm going to give you a tour and demonstrate an example of how this map might work by showing you the map that we built with that Region 12 Comprehensive Center project for the Colorado Department of Education. So I'll give you kind of a quick, not an intense tour, but show you a little bit of what it looks like and how it might work. So this is the GIS application that for the Colorado Department of Education. It's organized in these various dashboards, which are centered around a specific essential question. So you can see these different tabs at the top of the map. So this first dashboard is kind of the first essential question, which is really what's the status and what are the long-term patterns of educator mobility and attrition in districts and schools. So in the center, you can see the map. On the left-hand side of the screen is really the filters and drop-downs and buttons to kind of control what data sets you can see and manipulate in the map. On the right-hand side is our legend, so we can understand what is the symbology in the map. And then this box in the bottom right-hand corner, we have that in a couple of dashboards where they might define specific terms or other key things to know about the analysis. In some of the other dashboards, we also have kind of charts or graphs in case there's some other information we want to display besides just based on place. So in this map, you can see the districts that are highlighted in blue, and the darker the color of the blue, the greater the mobility and attrition rate. The little dots and squares all around signify the different schools. So we have circle for non-charter public schools, and then a square for charter schools. And again, the darker, more reddish orangey color means that they have higher mobility and attrition rate. We also scaled the mobility and attrition rate per 100 students so that we could clearly see some of the differences fairly between our rural and our urban schools. So you could imagine a small district with 100 students and then 10 teachers leave, that would have a rate of 10 for our mobility and attrition rate because we've scaled it per 100 students. But then a larger district that has 10,000 students, and if 1,000 teachers leave, they would also have a rate of 10. So we just scaled it in order to kind of clearly see the differences between our rural and urban districts. So if we want to just focus at the district level, we can turn off the school. And right now, this is showing the mobility and attrition rate at the district level for teachers. We can also look at the mobility and attrition rate for special service providers, such as paraprofessionals, and also for principals. And then we also have a view that lets us see the mobility and attrition rate over 5 years. So really seeing what is the difference or trend in the last 5 years for mobility and attrition. And you can zoom into this map. This is just the state view. So if I was to look and say, okay, where are some places where I see high mobility and attrition rate? Well, I look at this sort of southeast corner, I might want to take a look at this district, which is Kim Reorganized School District 88. And I can see in this data that they have a mobility and attrition rate of around 9, which is higher, it looks like, than some of its immediate neighbors. But there are some other ones that, but this is clearly the one that has the most mobility and attrition rate in that region. But maybe I want to see the trend. Is it just this year? Is it a part of a long-term pattern? So then we can compare and see the 5-year difference. And again, in this same corner, you can see that Kim Reorganized is still on the darker end of the spectrum. But interestingly, there's this other district that, still in this kind of remote rural area, Village School District, and their mobility and attrition rate is less. So maybe we want to zoom in and kind of look what's going on at the school level, because maybe at the district level, it's not really showing us what's going on. So I'm going to take a look at the current year and add the school level. And you can see sometimes the schools overlap each other, but there's only a couple of schools. So I can click on this little dot and see the schools. So at this high school, the mobility and attrition rate is 13. And then their elementary school is 4. So that tells me a lot of the mobility and attrition challenges are happening at the high school level. So we might want to explore what are the particular strategies that would work in the context of a high school and dig a little bit closer on what is going on in that high school. And then our sort of bright spot that we identified here.
Jessica, just one question. So can you clarify, we have a question in the chat just about the 13% or 9%, or even here you're saying that yeah, what that means relative
Yeah.
to other attrition rates, which are often higher, right?
Yes. So it's not percentage. This is where I was saying we've scaled the mobility and attrition rate per 100 students. So it's really a ratio, because you would really have skewed numbers if you were to compare your rural to urban. So in my example before, if we had a small district with 100 students and 10 of those teachers leave, that would give you a mobility and attrition rate of 10. So it's not percent. Whereas a large district with 10,000 students and then 1,000 teachers leave would still have a mobility attrition rate of 10. Because we know in our rural communities, if a large group of teachers turn over, that's a greater impact than maybe our urban areas. So by scaling the mobility attrition per 100 students was a way to help us more clearly see the impact of turnover on our students versus straight percentages. I know it
Thank
is
you.
complicated, so it's okay if folks missed that one. The first time we built this map, we did do percentages that were straight, and it was feedback that we got from the first set of stakeholders that we shared the map, gave us that feedback because they really thought, I don't know if this is really accurately capturing what turnover is like in our rural communities versus urban.
That
Great
makes
question
sense.
though.
Thank you.
Yes. Um, So I was just showing like Kim, and we saw at the school level that Kim reorganized. It was really the high school that had a higher rate. Their elementary school was a much lower. And then we had identified this neighboring district that was on an improving trend in their mobility and attrition rate, but is similarly in kind of a remote rural area of Colorado. So they might have somewhat similar conditions and wanted to take a look at what's going on at the school level. So looking at their high school, their mobility and attrition rate is even lower than the elementary school at Kim reorganized. So it may be an opportunity to dig into what's going on in that district to explore, are there strategies or best practices that we can learn? Because if there's similar contexts and neighbors, there might be facing similar conditions. And so those strategies might be transferable to another district. So again, identifying a challenge as well as are there opportunities to learn? So I just want to show you all one more dashboard and give you another scenario of how you might use this map to identify challenges and opportunities as you think about addressing educator shortages. So in this dashboard, we're looking at the relationship between the location of preparation programs and district hiring needs. So now the district data we're using here that's highlighted blue is unfilled positions. So it's letting us know the vacancies in that district. We also scaled this per 100 students because again, more vacancies in a rural community would have a larger impact on those students. The squares and circles signify the different preparation programs, and the larger the square or circle, the greater number of graduates that comes from that particular prep program. So if we want to take a look to see which districts have vacancies and have been struggling to fill English language arts teachers, and then where are the prep programs that provide candidates licensed in ELA. And then you can see there's quite a few prep programs that offer it, but mostly around the Denver and kind of urban areas here. Got a couple in the West. But interesting, this little district here, which is Sargent School District, which is kind of in the southern part, is the district with the darkest, so meaning it has the most vacancies per 100 students in English language arts. But interestingly, there are two prep programs right next door. They have Adams State University, as well as this regional BOCES, or that provides alternative licensing programs. So on the flip side, I'd be curious to know, okay, there is a prep program nearby. They prepare only a small number of English language arts graduates. It was like one. But maybe we could bring together district folks from Sargent with Adams State University to explore partnerships. Maybe they can do a grow your own program or explore other ways to partner to expand the number of ELA graduates who could then be hired in this district. I'm also curious to know, does Sargent hire graduates from Adams State University. And so we have another tab on this dashboard that lets us see where do the graduates from the various prep programs, which districts hire them. So I've already filtered it for Adams State University, and you can see some of their immediate neighbors and the district they're located in hire graduates. But our little sergeant here, this little guy here, is now highlighted in blue, which tells us that they've not hired any graduates from that prep program. So we might want to explore why. Is it because there's a lack of partnership? Is there some sort of reputation in the district? Or maybe has that prep program just not done sort of outreach to really push their candidates to want to work in that district, even though they're working in a bunch of the other districts nearby. So the map can explore some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, but you really need to bring together some of the stakeholders that are involved in these districts and prep programs and other regional partners to unpack why, to add some of that context to explore why graduates aren't going to that particular district, or why haven't they partnered further, and then help foster those potential collaborations. So there's a bunch more dashboards. I won't go into all of them, but wanted to just give you a quick tour of how it can work and how you might be able to use this tool to explore shortages as you think about how you might strengthen the educator workforce. And so I also just wanted to ask you all, as you think about now that you've got a peek at the map, what type of data would be most interesting to you to layer on your educator workforce data, and why? We have more data in that Colorado map, but I'm curious, what are some things that as you looked at the map that's kind of interesting or would be interesting to you to see on top of your educator workforce data, and why? So if you can answer that question in the chat box. Thinking about different types of data that might be interesting to layer on a map like this. Great. So I see things like the ratio of teachers of colors to students of color. That's a great one. I'll just preview. You will get to see that later on in this presentation. So I like this segue. Poverty data from the census. Yes, kind of trying to understand the communities outside of our schools. Housing availability. Yes, that's a big thing that I think we want to add to the Colorado map, because they have this resort community. And so it's so unique that really makes housing more expensive. And I'm sure other places have other kinds of impacts to the cost of housing. Oh, community income. So yeah, data to understand what are the salaries of the community in there, like the median salary compared to teacher salary. What does unemployment look like? Great. These are all great. So you're starting to see not only your own data like that you might have within your SCA or within your district, but that you can layer other types of community or census data to really get a richer understanding of how these systems impact one another. Great. So thank you for starting to brainstorm some other data layers you might want to add to a map like this. My last little pitch is to explain, again, the GIS map is just a tool, but it's really a tool to be used part of a larger data-driven stakeholder approach. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but it can be really helpful as you think about these first two steps. It can be another tool to help us disaggregate data and understand regional patterns and the relationships between these different systems that are impacting our educator workforce. And I found it can be a tool that's great at bringing together different entities and stakeholders. Again, because our workforce is a cross-sectoral problem, it's different entities control a different piece of the pie of the continuum. And so this can be a nice tool to bring those folks together to see what are the opportunities to partner, what are some of the challenges, as well as supporting their own work on supporting the workforce separately. But it's not, again, those are just the first two steps, but it can be helpful for steps 1 and 2. You still need those stakeholders to come together and add the context to what we're seeing in the data, and then help them to identify what are the appropriate evidence-based strategies, but targeting them to the right place. So it really is part of this larger approach.